We are now recording. So up on the screen, we have the traffic calming section of the 2007 comprehensive plan. And a lot of what this discusses is having narrow streets that are going to incorporate elements that are going to, or be designed in a way that traffic is calm or typically considered to be slower. People feel comfortable moving in and out of the street, using the street in multiple ways and not just as throughput for motor vehicles. And you'll note that we have things like 12-foot travel lanes or 8-foot parking lanes. And we've really designed some nice looking streets in cross sections here from the 2007 plan, showing different intersections, showing different treatments that could be utilized in order to make sure that we actually have calm streets, like a median with infiltration swale, for example. And down here in the examples of traffic calming strategies, we have a lot of different elements ranging from narrowing the street with striped lanes or parking, rebuilding the street to have narrower curb-to-curb widths or mid-block bulb outs or curb extensions or intersection bulb outs, deflecting vehicle paths using things like roundabouts or modified intersections or chicanes or traffic circles. And then also sharing pavement space. So how do we use our pavement space? Is it just for on-street parking on two sides? Is it for it on one side? Do we include other facilities, et cetera? And I want to draw attention to our 2017 Complete Streets policy at this moment to take a look at what we heard back in 2017 from the public, which was largely an extension of a reiteration of those 2007 goals. So what are we most comfortable with as we talk about redesigning our rights of way for pedestrian environments? And curb extensions were incredibly comfortable. Things like rectangular rapid flashing beacons, which we've deployed in some higher conflict areas in the city. Places like median islands are still incredibly well received by our communities. Really, the only thing that didn't seem to begin to inch toward 50% are things like crossing flags, which is pretty rarely used, where you have a bucket with crossing flags and you hold it up and march across the street so that people can see you. But a lot of these other elements are elements that can be easily designed into a street, either ranging from better painting to, you could do curb extensions that are going to be solid concrete, for example. And similarly, we have bicycle facilities here. So, if we're talking about how we utilize our public rights of way, are we going to utilize all that space for parking, or can it be used for things like separated bicycle lanes at the sidewalk level or at the street level, or buffered bicycle lanes? So having a larger pavement width, for example, or just having painted bicycle lanes or a bigger highway shoulder, for example. So I want to turn to the subcommittee here and tell us, does this still ring true to you? Are these still goals, having traffic calming in our community? Do these elements that are reiterated in 2017 and noted in 2007 still elements that you think should be considered for traffic calming in the city of Winona? Yep, do we still think traffic calming is, and do we still like these elements?
Yes, there we go. I mean, definitely. I like the diagram there because it's just like so many different ideas. And I mean, it seems like you could just pick whichever one everyone would be most comfortable with. You know what I mean?
Whatever a modified intersection is, I'm not comfortable with.
Yeah, exactly. That one, I would say no to that one too, because I am confused and I don't know where anyone's supposed to go. But like something easy, like, you know what I mean? Just like that bulb out, you know what I mean? I know, like, I think it was Red Wing somewhere. Gosh, I'm trying to think of the place that has it. But I mean, it's just a common thing in a lot of busy areas or towns where, you just put that out there. So there's less of a gap for you to cross across the street there, But I know that was up for contention many a time. So, yeah.
But the stripe lanes in the park and just painting the streets calmer, I think nobody's going to object to that, probably.
I agree.
The only thing I would say with the stripe lanes is it's not very effective. I mean, it gives people that visual, But like on Riverview, for example, we had it striped accidentally a foot too narrow. People then slow down. I mean, it's an option. It's got its efficacy. It's just not high. It's a cheap option, but
Right, and for that one, what is the Sharrow for? That's supposedly for the bike on the stripe lane?
I think in that instance, that shared lane marking is for a bicycle, not for parking plus bicycle.
Okay, that's better.
And I'll look at Ryan here. I think most of us agree that that's kind of an unworkable standard in town.
I think really to saying traffic calming and complete streets is honestly kind of opposite of each other. Like your stripe lane, you're picking biking over the parking, you're not having that complete street, or the ball, you're having the traffic calming, but you're not allowing for biking necessarily or whatever. So I think you kind of have to pick one or the other. You can't really have both.
Well, so I don't know because, yeah, maybe not. So,
Unless you're comfortable biking in the travel lane.
yeah, so my favorite is to bike on 7th Street because you're just biking in the middle of the street as though you were a car, and there are hardly any cars there because there are so many stop signs, and the cars that are there are going slow because there are so many stop signs. So you're right there in traffic, but you're not in danger.
Carrie, I'm sorry, I'm gonna politely disagree with you. I love biking on Wabasha Street when I'm looking to bike on a calm street. You know what I mean? But if I'm trying to like get to where I'm going per se, like I don't want to use Wabasha because it's the bumpiest streets and there's tons of stop signs. And I guess if it's going to be a complete streets thing, then like it should be good for biking on all the streets. You know what I mean? And I don't know. And that's not good for driving. So it's not a complete streets thing because like you said, there's all the stop signs. So I guess it is choosing in some cases, but I would like to think there's some sort of design that we can do that would like do both. But I don't know. I'm not the engineer. So yeah.
What about the bike lanes that are designated with the plastic poles that are permanently in the ground? Separated? No,
Yeah, just trying to think I guess that'd be an option. It'd probably be more of an expensive option. It could be done, I suppose, though, yes.
and that would be sharing then. I mean, that would be traffic in both
Yeah,
ways.
just trying to think how the parking would work. I guess you could have travel lane parking and then have your divided bike lane. Yeah,
Okay.
you'd start having a very wide pavement section, which drives price up, but yes, it would be an option.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like that. Something separated and something protected for bikes, and rather than having a biker be exposed all the time on most streets. And what's the Hamilton Street for a bike lane right now? I can't remember.
Hamilton Street right now just shares that parking lane with the biking. There was a recommendation in the complete streets policy to potentially look at a what's called an advisory bicycle lane. They are being rolled out in some portions of the United States. And sorry, I'm pulling up that map here. Oh, wrong one. And so going up Hamilton Street here we have buffered or standard bicycle lanes or advisory bike lanes as an option because Hamilton Street was recently reconstructed and it's just not wide enough to accommodate a bicycle lane without removing parking, to Ryan's point about trade-offs. Advisory bicycle lanes do require an approval process through the state and a study period, and some cities have found them to be unpopular and have reverted them back. Most recently, I believe, in Santa Mara, California, somewhere over there.
Also, I don't believe state aid allows or has a complete streets policy, which Hamilton, most of our north-south streets there for the bike lane is pretty much all state aid streets. We're required to have parking. We're required to have anything that they're wanting. We have to have that to get our funding. So some of those blue streets we just won't be able to do that and get our state funding.
Was there a way to identify where we could? I mean, any kind of these measures, it seems like if aid is tied to it and sometimes it's impossible, then we don't even need to talk about it.
On state aid streets, yeah, it's more or less, I would say, probably not going to happen. Could we do it? Maybe, but we've got our standards that we have to follow. So it might be on a not state aid route that we would have to look at it.
Okay.
So that brings up a good point from Kay. This is ultimately, we're looking at a lofty 30,000 foot view. We do want to set a direction as part of this comprehensive plan process. And while this map in particular lives in the complete streets policy, we would anticipate updating this complete streets policy as situations arise or change based on requirements, either from Minnesota state aid or based on requirements of grant funding that we might get or requirements that city council might place upon a project. So the individual details of an individual street would be, even though we were just talking about Hamilton Street, would be more in this policy document rather than living necessarily within the complete streets policy. So we would say, yeah, we want traffic calming, or yeah, we do value the trade-off of bike lanes for parking, for example, but not necessarily specifically Hamilton Street should have bike lanes and remove the parking on one side, for example. Brian, we haven't heard from you yet. I want to make sure we're including you if you have any additional thoughts. You're muted. Hold on. We're going to unmute you. Or I'm asking to unmute you. Can you unmute yourself, Brian? There you go.
Okay. Back to the original question. Were we still wanting to do the things in the 2017 plan? Yes. I believe so. The traffic calming thing, striping, any or mixture of that thing, depending on the location. Too bad the Broadway thing got axed. Although I don't know, a complete bulb out on every intersection maybe not have been necessary. I would maybe, if it was up to me, done bulb outs done a pedestrian study. Okay, where are the pedestrians at? Let's do something for where the pedestrians, majority of the pedestrians go. Yeah, and Wabasha Street works good for cycling because there isn't much traffic on it. It is a bumpy street. A lot of town isn't that hard to bike in. East End, it seems like bikes and pedestrians are an afterthought, and then Mankato and East. What else we got to think about here? We used to always talk about getting across bikes and pedestrians across 61. That seems to have been improved. There could still be something better come in the East End. If that's what comes to mind on this for now.
Just some thoughts. That's phenomenal. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Well, with that, I do want to turn our attention to the 2017 Complete Streets Policy a little bit more and really focus on chapters 4 and 5, which is the beginnings and the nuts and bolts more of the policy. And the reason why we want to touch on this a little bit is this is the first opportunity we've really had to go back and look at the Complete Streets Policy since its adoption in December of 2017. And since its adoption, we did note that we had goals to go back and look at this every 2 years. Of course, COVID happened, so it's been a little bit more difficult to actually go back and address all of our programmatic needs. But a lot of what we would do is we would update a lot of suggestions for traffic calming or other design elements into a policy like a Complete Streets Policy, or adopting something similar or updating this to reflect that. as we go forward. So I do want to take a look here overall at the process and overall what was being recommended. So if we roll down, there were about 10 elements included in the Complete Streets policy, and obviously they're listed there right in front of you. And the overall vision was to make sure that we have safe and accessible, well-connected and visually attractive surface transportation networks that support a balance of users. And so that was the intention, and making sure that we have an actual network doing so. One of the things that Brian DeFrang, our public works director, mentioned when he was at the start of this meeting is that the interconnected grid system of Winona is really beneficial. And we've heard that in our land use subcommittee as well, is that we really want to try and reiterate this interconnected grid system as much as possible. And then how can we serve all users and modes? So just like Ryan was pointing out, we need to make sure that we're being accommodating when we make these trade-offs. For example, if you end up creating a route and it ends up too narrow for freight, for example, we do need to address those types of elements. But in particular, this plan calls out including seniors and children and immigrants and people with disabilities and vulnerable users who are more at risk for serious injury or death when involved in motor vehicle related collisions. So how can we look out for some of our more vulnerable users in addition to just regular users? And it looks like, Mitch, you want to say something. So I'm gonna turn it over to you now that we've covered 3 of the 10 elements thus far here in this document.
Okay. Gosh, I always speak before this thing turns on. So specifically with the all users and modes and trying to make it safe for users of all ages, abilities, and income levels. And for me, I'm like, is Huff Street by my house safe for a kid to bike on? And I don't think so. I think a kid could, and they would be safe, but I don't necessarily think it is like very safe for a kid to be biking on it. You know what I mean? Like, exactly. So, I mean, and there are many streets in Winona that are like that. And if we're really trying to integrate it and make it there for everyone, then I just think that we haven't done that, specifically with where's the quote? Well-connected and visually attractive surface transportation network and balance are directly in the vision part of it. And I mean, not to like beat a dead horse, but like the Broadway thing would have literally satisfied both of those things. And then they said no. So they went directly against the policy that was agreed upon by the citizens as the thing that we wanted. So yeah, that's how I feel about that. That might be a little much. Agreed upon by the citizens might be a little bit much.
Thank you very much for those comments. Anybody else want to add anything here in these first 3 sections? Overall, Mitch, I mean, you expressed some frustration with the way things actually end up being implemented, but does that vision still ring true to you?
Yes.
All right. So,
but like specifically, like I want to be super clear that I love Winona and the integrated grid system, and I love that I can get anywhere. If I really want to dip over to a calm street, like I can, and I do, because I'm scared to go on Huff Street. And I just don't think that we should abandon all the streets, you know what I mean? Like the main drags to just cars, because we want balance,
You keep mentioning the integrated grid system and what an asset it is, but as opposed to like cul-de-sacs or something where it's little communities that are all separated, is that what we mean?
so the idea, yes. So typically, you see a lot of American cities, they'll grow on a grid system. And then in the last few decades, particularly post 1950s, 1960s, you see a lot more cul-de-sacs or lollipops that only serve a select community, for example. One of the issues is, if you end up doing street reconstruction or utility reconstruction in those areas, you end up shutting down a road and there's no real diversion or redundancy for access, or you end up resurfacing a road that is a half-mile long and only serves 6 houses, for example. So the tax value doesn't necessarily justify a really wide road, for example. So those types of things are concerns. And so there are a lot of benefits. And I think Brian did do a really good job of mentioning those. And then I think it was our first or second meeting originally. All right, we're going to continue on down here. So all projects and phases. So the city of Winona will apply this policy to all street projects, which include new construction, reconstruction, retrofit, resurfacing, rehabilitation, and change in the allocation of pavement space on an existing street. And I think that we'll touch a little bit more on this in the exceptions section, but like Ryan was saying, there's a balance and a trade-off, and we'd expect that those are considered by the governing bodies, in this case, the city council, as they do consider these projects. And similarly, we talk about how the jurisdiction will apply to public and private street redesign or designs. And then also, as we talk about things like municipal state aid roads or county state aid highway routes, and how we can work with different organizations in order to try and implement some of these elements. And related to that, the design elements. So we talked about traffic calming earlier, and it sounds like this subcommittee is again reflecting what we heard in 2017 and what we heard in 2007, is that we want to see calm streets. We want to see some level of design that's reflective of that. And where do those types of elements live? And they live in things like the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials documentation. So ASHTO, or the Federal Highway Administration, has good direction, or the Institution of Transportation Engineers, or MnDOT, or the National Association of City Transportation Officials. Ranging from publishing good looking small grids, like Mitch was mentioning, that he liked that grid showing all these different options, to actual design guidance that's either adopted by a state. There are different design elements that you can play into that get you toward things like complete streets or toward traffic calming. Any thoughts related to the overall jurisdiction, projects, phases, and general design elements? Does all of that seem to jive with this group? I'm seeing some head nods. More head nods. Nobody's lunging for a microphone. That's good. And then if we look at the next section, which is context sensitivity, making sure that we're actually being reflective of the neighborhoods that are being affected, or reflective of the overall areas and goals of our communities. Is the goal of every street to be that perfect complete street, or is some of it to move things like freight or to move more motor vehicles? Is the goal to act more like a road than like a street, for example? And the overall goal, of course, is to preserve and enhance our scenic, aesthetic, historical, and environmental resources, while also improving and maintaining safety, mobility, economic, and infrastructure conditions. So it's always that balance component. How are we measuring that? Taking a look at performance measures, we measure this by looking at things like number of crashes. So you'll see referenced in this document, the MnDOT crash tool, which will tell you how many crashes are in a specific area, with whether or not they're fatalities, or whether or not it's motor vehicle and pedestrian, et cetera. Things like injury types, miles of walkways and bikeways, on-time arrival for Winona Transit, number of students who actually walk or bike, pedestrian and bicycle counts, et cetera. Do these types of performance measures that we're seeing here in items A through J, do they seem like performance measures that would actually be reflective of what you do want to see coming out of your community?
Yes, I really thought these were exciting, especially if they were measured. I couldn't tell if anything, maybe they have. I think there was measurements up until 2015 in this document talking about the crashes. I think numbers talk, and these are all, I liked all of them. So I think we should keep those.
I was just curious more than anything, have we been keeping these performance measures? Do we know how many commuters in what types of transportation? Do we know how many students bike or walk? And I'm just curious.
Yeah, so a lot of that relies on data that can be published through the US Census, for example, does track commuter share, or you can track by age group, or the American Community Survey, which publishes 5-year averages, also does. Ryan, I am certain, has gone out and measured numerous different road traffic counts on different roads, particularly as we near different projects. So going out and doing that, we've experimented with looking at big data solutions. So I know that the engineering department was looking at potentially using things like Streetlight, which tracks your cell phone data, or if you're looking at Strava Metro, which publishes now for free all the data in a heat map format, so you can track, what your corridors are, what your corridor numbers are for those who use it primarily for recreation. You can extrapolate from there. And so we did end up using some of that type of information in discussing things like Mankato Avenue's reconstruction a few years ago before the project really got underway. And trying to move toward that. Some of these are ongoing in that manner, but some of them are more project by project in particular.
Cool.
I would describe it though as, you know, there's always room for more. I wish we all had all of the data to know who was using what and where and when.
What's a protected bicycle facility?
So a protected bicycle facility or protected bike lane would be something that is either grade separated. So you could put it at sidewalk level, or some communities do it slightly lower than sidewalk level, or you have a concrete median, or even as Ryan was pointing out, you could put parked cars between a bicycle facility and the travel lane. So the parked cars are actually operating as that buffer. There are communities that use steel posts that you can drill into the ground that are a few inches off of the ground.
But we're talking about a bike lane. I didn't know what we meant by facility.
Well, it could be a shared use path, or it could be a bike lane, or
Okay.
it could be something different. Yep.
Okay. And how much of Winona, do you happen to know what % of the city is within a half mile of a shared use path, protected bicycle facility or other?
I actually don't off the top of my head.
Okay.
And you know, it's important for you guys to all mention these things. And like I mentioned, we're supposed to be reevaluating this every couple of years. We don't always have everything that's in this policy. So I don't have that document. I'm not going to put you on the spot, Ryan, but I don't think we have that document in engineering either. But it would be an interesting document that we could probably draw up and track with changes over the years.
I think it would be good for the number of crashes on Broadway, for example, and the types of injuries, to be able to have a simple graph that is published quarterly in the Winona Post. This is how Broadway is going since we've kept it 4 lanes. I mean, I don't know who would publish it, but just something that is graspable by the people that are so saying it's not going to help to do some calming.
Specific.
I'm going to put published crashes for Broadway and other streets, perhaps. So something more like that. Okay. And to your point earlier, Kay, you know, there is a lag in data sometimes too, you know. I think that what we discovered in this complete streets policy in particular is it's sometimes difficult to sort through, for example, police reports and that information, you know, how do we aggregate that information consistently?
Sure.
It's also a problem. Yep. All right, seeing nobody else lunging for a microphone, we're going to talk about implementation over here as well. Or sorry, hold on. To your point, Kay, we even do have it called out that we're supposed to be creating a biannual report. So once every other year to the city council, talking about progress and implementing the policy. And here I'll own up. I don't think that I've ever participated in creating that report, even though it says the Winona Planning and Zoning and Engineering departments. Ryan, I don't think you've done one in 2 years. You haven't been here for 2 years, so we're gonna let you off the hook for that one. So there's room for growth for us as well. Things would be very different if we had done it. Yes, that's right, Carrie. So the implementation policy, the idea here is that it's supposed to be carried out cooperatively among all departments. So when we begin doing projects, we all get together and review them. It includes things like affected property owners, residents, users, advocacy groups in our community, working together with both internal public people as well as private developers when they come forward. And of course, our engineering department, who actually have the technical experience and know-how, are able to review this agency or act as the review agency. And to Ryan's point, you know, we don't do a lot of self-funded projects here in the city of Winona either. So Ryan, do you think it's 1 or 2 state aid roads a year projects?
Yeah, probably one at most of the time.
So probably about 1 a year. And a lot of that really seems to be, how do we answer the requirements that the state is putting upon those state aid road projects as well? And maybe that'll be something that we can take a look at as well. And so making it part of our routine practice and everyday operations. So how do we make sure that we are really living this complete streets policy and not just saying that we have a complete streets policy, for example? So maintaining things like pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure, which we do have a relatively recent map for, prioritizing projects to eliminate gaps in walkways and bikeway networks, So we have all these projects ready and programmed. But we'll get over here to clear and accountable exceptions and why some things might not be implemented. But does anybody have any thoughts related to implementation, hot on the tails, excuse me, of our performance measures? All right, implementation, not a very talkative topic. I get it. So if we look down here at our clear and accountable exceptions, these are the exceptions that we say you don't necessarily need to consider complete streets for a specific project, for example. So public transit not existing or planned along a project corridor, you don't necessarily need to include transit improvements. A bikeway not existing or planned for a project corridor per the future bikeways map, which we looked at briefly earlier in this meeting. If there isn't one, it doesn't need to be addressed. Freight vehicles not existing or on a planned project corridor. So looking at our city's truck route maps, which truck route map here, our trucks here, how will that implement or affect whether or not we consider complete streets in those projects? Routine maintenance of the transportation network that's not changing the actual roadway geometry, lane widths, lane uses, or crosswalk locations, improving mowing, sweeping, joint repair, etc. So occasionally you'll get questions, and by you'll get questions, I mean, I probably don't get these questions. Engineering probably gets these questions. Public Works probably gets them. Like, hey, what are we doing with XYZ project? And if it's just doing the same thing, we have an exception that says we don't actually have to implement this complete streets policy. And then they must be approved by the city council when it's a well-traveled road, street, shared use path, or walkway prohibits use by specific users. So like an interstate, or if the project is going to be too expensive compared to the need or the scope or the probable use, or if there's a reasonable and equivalent project parallel to and or in close proximity to the road. So say we end up implementing a great bicycle boulevard facility and the next street over, somebody says we need a bicycle boulevard. Well, we already have one, for example. How do we avoid redundancy where we could use that money elsewhere? What are your thoughts related to these exceptions to this overall policy? Mitch, you look like you want to say something. All right, we can wait until you can figure out how to say it. Brian, we haven't heard from you in a little bit. Anything you would like to add here? If you're talking, you are currently muted. We can work on unmuting you. Hold on. I'm asking to unmute you.
Okay, no, I wasn't talking, but exceptions which must be approved by city council. Too expensive compared to probable use. Yeah. So that kind of comes back to like what Brian DeFrank said earlier in meetings, that you can plan lots of things, but the council won't choose not to pay for them or go along with them. Doesn't help much. But it's good to consider, proximity to other existing facilities. That's all. Thank you.
All right. Carrie, you were going to grab a microphone, I could tell.
I don't know. It seems perfectly reasonable to me for the for the city to recognize that not everything is always necessary. And so if we have something one street, a bike path on one street, we don't need to have it, on the street next door. You don't need to have it on every single street because you can choose the street next door. And also, right, we don't have endless money. And so if a project is too expensive, you just can't do it. And that's just a fact of life. And we need to recognize, and it's good to recognize that we have to work within those boundaries.
I agree that we need to work within the boundaries, but and I just think that specific exception, it leaves it up to like, maybe they did like a survey and they did engagement with the community, and like 70-80% said we're okay with like curb bump outs, which is what the complete streets policy said. But then it goes to the city council, and then it's just up to their opinion of, well, the probable use of this is it's not worth the money. And they get to decide if the probable use is not worth the money. When it went through the engagement, everyone said it would be worth the money, basically. I don't know. And I know that's why they're elected and that's their job. They are the one who get to make those like financial decisions. And I understand, like, maybe if I was in that situation and I was feeling pressure to like make sure the city budget comes out, that I would maybe cave. But I just think that, I don't know, if it seems like everyone wants it and then it's just up to a few people to decide it's too expensive, I don't know. If there's another way to word that exception, I would be cool with that.
The only thought I have is, I mean, it's kind of in there already, but I guess just engineering wise, I think it's important we have something along the lines of at the discretion of the engineer, just because if something's not safe, we can put it in a plan, but if it's not safe, I mean, I can't sign off on a plan that's not safe. It's, you know, it's risking me personally, my license, my everything, same with Brian. So I think it's kind of in there already, and, you know, not trying to shoot anybody's ideas down, just safety wise for, I guess, everyone, it's a good thing to have in there, I think.
Thank you all very much. So we're going to move on to some policy recommendations. And again, the overall comprehensive plan is going to be really 30,000 feet in the air, but this document is going to be part of the things that we need to update after we go through and approve the overall comprehensive plan. So strategy 1, improving accessibility for people with disabilities. And the first action recommended there is to complete an ADA transition plan, which was completed, and we included it, and I believe right before our first meeting here. And then action 1B, which was adopting ProWeg as the city's preferred design guidelines. And I don't think we did adopt ProWeg in that ADA transition plan, but the overall transition plan was already in the works when we adopted this policy. So not necessarily something that we needed to go back to reiterate. Inventory and walkway locations. And this is something that I don't think that we have still. And Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that we do have like a GIS layer that's showing all of our inventoried sidewalks. And in this case, taking a look at overall networks, whether or not you have unmarked crosswalks, marked crosswalks, et cetera. I think we largely rely on actual on-site visits in order to determine those. Updating the maintenance plan for walkways. A lot of this came up, and you know, our planning commission likes to bring this up every year, is talk about winter maintenance in particular. So we look at things like crosswalk maintenance, smoothness of sidewalks, winter maintenance, et cetera. Those all kind of came in on the lower end of excellence in our initial survey here. So this became really a goal to update that. I think that a lot of people are really satisfied with our fairly aggressive sidewalk replacement program, though. Which is referenced a little bit further down. So really it's more about the details related to that. So including crossing surfaces and walkway inspections, for example. So making sure that we can take a look at that and say, yeah, not just looking at the curb ramp, you know, how does the actual walkway, the crosswalk actually interface with that and work? Then this last action 3B was phasing a citywide, city-led walkway snow and ice cleaning program. This would be quite a shift in responsibility. You know, right now, property owners are responsible for clearing their sidewalks in front of their properties. This would have really shifted the whole paradigm to encourage the city to be proactive, I believe, starting in the core of the city and working its way out from downtown.
There was a plan, or there is a plan for the city to begin removing the snow from the sidewalks?
That was a recommendation in this plan. That is correct.
And is that
Just like we were talking about with clear exceptions, you know, this would be a pretty big policy shift. It would require a lot of public engagement. It would require a lot of staffing analysis and equipment analysis from the city side as well. Yeah.
big news.
I mean, I think that's great. Or maybe, okay, so can we like shift it a little bit in that maybe it's just where the crosswalks are? Because what ends up happening is the plows go, and then you have like this huge, like 3-4 foot tall hunk of ice right there that you got to cross over all the time. And me personally, I can do it, but like I could only imagine how hard that would be for like my neighbor Nancy Piper, who's like 80 years old and walks her Shih Tzu every single day. You know what I mean? And if like I think that'd be less of a commitment by the city than clearing like full sidewalks. They could just like make sure that that one spot is clear. And I understand that gets into the expense thing. Right. Yeah, probably. Or a fun fort for a kid.
Thanks. That's a good suggestion. I appreciate that suggestion.
Can I ask about the sidewalk or the corners on Broadway? Is that somebody told me due to gas lines? And I thought it was due to ADA.
Why we're doing it?
Yeah,
That was originally going to be part of the road diet. We had a grant for the ADA and a grant for the road diet. We were able to keep one of the grants for the ADA improvement. So that's why we're doing that, is we got the federal money for that yet. So they all will be built up to ADA standards now. No.
It is right now.
The comment was, will the road be dieted? And no. And then there were some comments and general agreement that, in fact, it is currently dieted because of construction and it flows quite well. It's nice, in the words of one of our subcommittee members. Here we have a fourth strategy to develop a crash evaluation program. This goes back to this idea of aggregating data. And I do think that this is probably a capacity concern. You know, how do we have enough staff time to go through and aggregate data and develop a program to aggregate that data? So something that probably hasn't been completed to date since the adoption of this policy. Mitch?
Oh no, I'm just grabbing.
You're just ready to talk? Okay. And so here's where you get some excerpts from the crash evaluation tool from MnDOT at the time. Here we have amending minimum parking regulations. So either including bicycle parking as a requirement or allowing bicycle parking as a substitution for automobile spaces. And this was something that was accomplished in 2020 or 2019, excuse me, where we do allow bicycle substitutions for residential uses. And here we have recommendations from another organization. So with that policy document, with those goals and strategies, it sounds like there is still support to reiterate some of these goals as we talk about the comprehensive plan and potentially updating this document following adoption of the comprehensive plan. I'm seeing some head nods. Obviously, there were some strong suggestions about what should be changed or supported. Any residual comments lingering in your minds that you'd like to get out here now in our last background information meeting?
So the exception for parking or the change for parking, that it was that every adult or every unit. Well, how can you explain again?
So our current parking minimums are based on either residential unit or outside of downtown, it's based on square footage of service area or storefront area or retail area. And the change that we put through in 2019 based on this document was to allow a substitution at a rate of 2 to 1. So 2 covered bicycle parking spaces for every 1 automobile space for residential uses. So rather than 2 automobile spaces, you could provide 4 bicycle parking spaces. And that's up to 4 automobile spaces total.
Oh, okay. I thought it was for every unit. They would pretend that one person was going to drive and the other was going to always bike, and that was a way
No,
they could
the
save
requirement
money.
is per unit, but we're not getting down to the detail of who's going to be biking or what have you. It's just to make sure that there is a facility available.
So per building, we're talking.
Per residential unit. So if you have a house, you would have a requirement of 2 automobile spaces, and you could substitute both of those if you wanted to with covered bicycle parking. Or If you had a fourplex, you would be required to have 8 automobile spaces, but you could substitute up to 4 of those with covered bicycle parking if you wanted to.
Okay. So if your people choose to have a car, as most of them will, they just need to find street parking instead of parking at the place you're renting to them.
If they
or-
do, yeah. So this goes back to the data and tracking the data. And we knew at the time that only about 72% of commuters are single occupancy vehicles. We knew that about 14% of people in Winona walk or bike to work. We know that there is a car-free percentage, particularly near the university, where we don't have as many cars. It doesn't seem that way because a lot of people do have cars, of course, and a lot of students will bring their cars to school. But there's a smaller percentage of people that have more than 2 vehicles than have less than 2 vehicles, right? So we wanted to provide flexibility to provide more housing. Go ahead, Mitch.
So just like last thoughts on all background information. I think it's all really good. Like I think they had great ideas in 2007 and 2017, I think, the Complete Streets thing. And I guess, you know, I want it to be more than just like we can put our hat on and be like, hooray, like we have a complete streets policy. Look at it. It's like perfect. You know what I mean? But we have exceptions, and it happens to be every single thing that we have written in the complete streets policy or the comp plan, it seems like. So if there's any way to like, I don't know, actually do the things that we said we were going to do. And if we're not going to do them, like, let's not say that we're going to do them, you know, because I'm getting my hopes up. Like I'm reading these things and I'm like, wow, this sounds awesome. But then I'm like, every time something comes up to improve it, it gets shot down. So I don't know. Yeah. Last thoughts, really cheery. Sorry.
Don't worry, Mitch, we won't end on that somber note. We're also going to look at when our next meeting will be scheduled. So if we could, I'd like to look 2 weeks out to the 21st. Does 4 o'clock continue to work for most of us? I know that we're missing some people due to summer activities right now, but I think 4 o'clock has worked well. Thumbs up or a head nod, Brian? Oh, we got a thumbs down from Ryan. We'll steal Brian DeFrang over. All right, perfect. So at the next meeting, what we're going to do is I'm going to bring together an emerging concepts document based on everything that we've been talking about for the last few meetings. And we're going to bring over a template for goals and objectives. And we're going to ask you to really kind of start thinking about how we can apply some of those emerging concepts that we've all been talking about into being goals and objectives that will be codified into the comprehensive plan. And that's what we'll focus on next time, more as a workshop session. And then we'll begin honing those a bit more in August. So in the next 2 meetings in August, we'll really begin to get those narrowed down and begin to put in some strategies. City staff will fill out some strategies to make sure that they are things that are consistent with engineering practices, consistent with the goals of the overall comprehensive plan, the vision and values, and really trying to integrate some of those other elements from other subcommittees at the same time. And then at the end of the goals and objectives sessions in August, those items will go forward to the steering committee, who will consider them as we draft the first draft of the comprehensive plan, which will then be reviewed by the public and go back to steering committee, planning commission, and city council 1 or 2 more times. So we've got our work cut out for us, but a good solid 3 workshop sessions following this meeting, and this transportation subcommittee will be done. So thank you all very much for your time today, and I will see you on the 21st at 4 p.m. Thanks.